What would you do if the man you sacrificed everything for hit the jackpot, then threw you out like a stranger, forgetting the promise he once signed with your name on it? The summer of 2004 was the kind of summer that stuck to your skin like molasses. In Atlanta, the pavement shimmered with heat, and the air buzzed with the sound of cicadas and car horns. It was the kind of heat that made you question your choices, every single one. But for Ava Carter, there wasn't much room to question anything. She was 26, working long, exhausting night shifts as a nurse's aide at Grady Memorial Hospital, and holding together what little of her life hadn't already frayed at the seams. Her days started when most people's ended. By 7 p.m., she was slipping on her scrubs. By 8, she was elbow-deep in the quiet, gritty work no one wanted to think about: bathing patients, delivering medication, sitting with the elderly when their families didn't come. She was paid just enough to make rent and send a few hundred each month to help her younger brother Logan with his college tuition. Everything else, meals, shoes, dreams, came second. But Ava never complained. She believed there was dignity in care, in sacrifice, even if no one saw it. She first met Marcus Whitmore on a sticky Thursday evening while waiting at the corner for the bus that would take her home. Her feet ached. Her lunch had been a granola bar from a vending machine, and her ponytail was halfway undone. Marcus stood nearby, leaning against a rusted street lamp, wearing a scuffed security uniform and holding a can of peach soda. He looked just as tired, just as sunburned by life. When their eyes met, it wasn't romantic. It was human, two people on the same weary path, too beat down to pretend otherwise. "Long shift?" he asked, holding out the soda like an offering. Ava took it, eyebrows raised. "Is it that obvious?" He laughed. "You look like someone who deserves the coldest drink in Georgia." They talked for 10 minutes. Then again the next day, and the next. Marcus worked security at a shipping yard down by the tracks. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. He told Ava he wanted more out of life, maybe go back to school, start a small business, get his mama out of the projects. He didn't have a plan exactly, but he had that hopeful fire in his voice, and Ava found herself leaning into it. Their courtship wasn't built on big gestures. There were no weekend getaways or candlelit dinners. Most nights, Marcus would meet her after her shift with a bag of chips and that same peach soda, and they'd sit on the steps outside her apartment, talking about everything and nothing, his dreams, her patience, the little indignities they both faced every day. They never talked about being poor, because it was the water they swam in. But they talked about what life could be if they just kept swimming. Marcus made her laugh when everything else felt too heavy. He cooked her breakfast after double shifts, eggs too salty, pancakes slightly burned, but it was the care that mattered. He rubbed her shoulders without her asking, remembered her brother's exam dates, and once showed up at her job just to leave her favorite candy on her locker. Ava had always been self-contained, self-sufficient, but slowly she realized she didn't mind sharing her space. She didn't mind having someone else's toothbrush next to hers, someone else's dreams tangled up with her own. Marcus made her feel seen in a way she hadn't known she was missing. Still, their lives were far from easy. Marcus got laid off from the shipping yard within a year of them dating. Layoffs were rolling through the city like thunderclouds, and he got caught in the storm. He picked up odd jobs loading trucks, cleaning basements, working night security in sketchy neighborhoods. Ava, in turn, picked up extra shifts. Sometimes she worked doubles, sometimes she pulled 16-hour days back to back. Her body ached constantly. Her hands were dry from sanitizers and gloves. But when Marcus talked about going back to school, she didn't flinch. She encouraged him. She believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. She took out a personal loan under her name to pay for his classes and textbooks. She never brought it up as a favor. Never threw it in his face. To Ava, helping Marcus wasn't a transaction, it was love. That same year, Marcus's mother lost her job and moved in with them, It was supposed to be just a couple weeks. It became 11 months. Ava gave up the bedroom and slept on the couch. She cooked for 3, juggled bills, managed her work, and still found time to braid her neighbor's kids' hair on the weekends for extra money. No one saw how hard she worked. Not really. But Marcus noticed, or at least Ava thought he did. One night, after a long day of missed buses and overtime shifts, Ava came home to find the lights off and candles on the floor. Marcus had cooked real dinner, not just fried eggs. There was music playing, and he handed her a piece of folded paper. "Just something to think about," he said sheepishly. It was a rough budget and a list of community colleges he'd looked into. He wanted her opinion. Ava sat on the couch, her eyes filling with quiet tears, not from exhaustion this time, but from the small flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they were going to make it. It wasn't about money, it wasn't about status, it was about building something together. That summer, 2 people with nothing except each other began the kind of love story no one puts in movies, because it didn't sparkle, it burned. Softly, steadily, like a flame waiting for its storm. Ava Carter had never known a life of ease. From the moment she stepped into adulthood, she had been carrying more than her share bills that didn't match the paycheck, a younger brother she promised her dying mother she'd support, and a body that never seemed to rest long enough to catch up with her soul. But with Marcus Whitmore, she thought maybe for once, she wouldn't have to carry it all alone. They didn't have much, but they made do. Their tiny 1-bedroom apartment in southwest Atlanta didn't have central air, but Marcus found a used box fan on Craigslist and rigged it into the window. They couldn't afford cable, so Ava read aloud from old library books while Marcus rested his head on her lap. Their fridge was usually more empty than full, but Ava knew how to stretch rice, beans, and frozen vegetables into something comforting. And when Marcus brought home extra snacks from a temp job, it felt like a celebration. Their love wasn't showy. It didn't need to be. It was in the small things. The way Marcus left notes in Ava's lunchbox. "Keep going. I see you." The way Ava would press a warm towel to Marcus's forehead when he came home feverish from working in the rain. The way they both leaned into the kind of love that was built to last through hard seasons, not just the good ones. But the hard seasons kept coming. When Marcus talked about going back to school, Ava didn't hesitate. She didn't think about the loan payments or the strain it would add to her schedule. She saw the look in his eyes, a mix of hope and fear, and she chose to be the bridge he needed. She filled out the FAFSA forms. She co-signed a personal loan. She bought used textbooks off eBay and stayed up late helping him study for exams she barely understood. And when the loan money ran out, she cleaned offices in Buckhead on Sunday mornings and braided her co-worker's daughter's hair on Sunday nights, just enough to keep things afloat. Marcus always said, "I'll make it up to you one day, baby. You'll see." And Ava believed him, because when you're in love and tired, you cling to promises like they're anchors. When Marcus's teenage son from a previous relationship showed up on their doorstep asking for help buying a car to get to his part-time job, Ava said yes, without flinching. She gave up her dream of buying a used car for herself that year. She caught the bus, rain or shine, even when her shoes had holes in the soles. When Marcus's mother, Sharon Whitmore, called crying after losing her job at the laundromat, Ava opened their home without hesitation. "Just a couple weeks," Sharon promised. It turned into nearly a year. Ava gave up the bedroom again, moved to the pull-out couch, and cooked for 3 instead of 2. Sharon wasn't cruel, but she wasn't grateful either. She mostly kept to herself, watching TV, smoking on the back porch, offering little in the way of help. But Ava never said a word. She just did what needed to be done, like always. There were nights Ava would come home after a double shift, peel off her scrubs, and sit alone in the dark kitchen, feet swollen, back aching, listening to the low hum of the fridge and the distant sound of laughter from the TV in the next room. And still she loved Marcus, because Marcus made her feel like all this struggle had a purpose. He wasn't lazy, he worked, he studied. He kissed her forehead when she cried in the shower. He made her believe that one day they would get out of this cycle, that her sacrifices would be worth something. Then came the night she sold the patch of land her father had left her. It was the only thing she had of him, a dusty acre in Macon that had sat untouched for years. They'd talked about maybe building on it someday, maybe retiring there. But Marcus had fallen behind on credit card payments, and his car had broken down again. Ava made the call, quietly, without ceremony, without guilt. She signed the deed over to a developer for just enough to pay the debts and make a down payment on a second-hand Honda. She never told anyone what it cost her to let it go. Not just the land, but the last thing her father had given her. It wasn't long before Ava was juggling 3 jobs: nurse's aide at night, cleaning offices on weekends, and running a small hair braiding business out of their living room. Her hands were always sore, her eyes always tired, but she pushed on. Because she believed in building something with Marcus, and Marcus, he kept promising, "Once I finish school, everything will change." So Ava smiled. She cooked. She worked. She loved. She carried the weight of 2 lives on one pair of shoulders, believing that one day Marcus would lift it with her. Because that's what partners do. Or at least, that's what she thought. By the fall of 2008, the leaves in Atlanta had started to curl at the edges and turn gold, like the city was holding its breath before winter. The air was cooler, and so was Ava Carter's heart, cool, not cold. Not hesitant, just careful. She had given 5 years of her life to Marcus Whitmore. 5 years of night shifts, second jobs, sick days sacrificed, and hope rationed like sugar during a drought. And she was still standing beside him. They had weathered layoffs, car trouble, overdraft fees, and moments where the only thing keeping the lights on was Ava's determination, but there was also laughter. Quiet dancing in the kitchen, study sessions at midnight, Marcus whispering dreams into her ear before sleep. So when Marcus got down on one knee in the back of their apartment building with a ring he bought on layaway from a pawn shop, Ava didn't hesitate. She said yes, not because she believed in fairy tales, but because she believed in herself and in the love she had helped build. Their wedding was small. A Thursday afternoon at the Fulton County Courthouse. No white dress, no aisle, just Ava in a pressed skirt suit, Marcus in his best slacks, and a few family members filling the seats behind them. Ava's brother, Logan Carter, stood as her witness, grinning with pride and a tinge of caution. Marcus's mother, Sharon Whitmore, sat 2 rows back, arms folded, her expression unreadable. A couple friends showed up late with warm hugs and soft jokes. There was no music, no cake, just the sound of the judge flipping through papers and asking, "Any prenups?" That's when Ava spoke up. "Actually, yes," she said, pulling a folded document from her purse. The room went quiet. Even Marcus blinked in surprise. It wasn't a formal prenup drafted by lawyers in tall glass buildings. It was a 2-page agreement, handwritten by Logan on college-ruled paper, with clean block letters and a simple promise. If Marcus Whitmore comes into any substantial financial gain, lottery, inheritance, lawsuit, etc., during the course of his legal marriage to Ava Carter, and if said marriage ends in divorce, the entirety of said gain shall be transferred to Ava Carter. There were blank lines for signatures, a notary stamp from the corner convenience store, and a date. Logan had insisted on it after too many nights of watching his sister work herself into the ground for a man still trying to find his footing. "It's not about trust," he had said. "It's about protection." Ava remembered her mother's words too. Money changes people. And people change when they finally get a taste of ease. Marcus laughed when he first read it. "You think I'm going to leave you after everything you've done for me?" he'd said, kissing her forehead. "If I ever get rich, it's 'cause of you." "You deserve every penny." So he signed. No fuss, no fight. He signed it with the same confidence he had when he promised he'd never stop loving her. That night, they ate fried chicken on the couch and shared a bottle of cheap champagne. No wedding band photos, wedding band. No social media posts, just them, alone, in the quiet satisfaction of something real. But for Ava, that piece of paper meant more than any diamond ever could. It was her safety net, her insurance, her proof that what she had given her time, her strength, her health, wasn't invisible. It meant that if Marcus ever did change, if the world ever pulled him too far from the man she fell in love with, she wouldn't be left with nothing. Because she had given everything. The years after the wedding weren't much different. Still tight budgets, still shared ramen dinners. But something about being married added a layer of commitment that felt heavier, steadier. Marcus finished community college and got a stable job managing warehouse inventory. The pay wasn't much, but it came with benefits and a promise of routine. Ava kept working nights but cut back on braiding appointments and weekend shifts. For a moment, life felt manageable. And in those rare moments when they had a little extra, when the tax return came in, or when Ava picked up a bonus shift, they'd talk about the future. "Someday, we'll have a place with a yard," Marcus would say. "Maybe raise a dog." "Someday, I'll sleep 8 hours without an alarm," Ava would reply, laughing. But even then, Ava never forgot the paper tucked in a manila envelope, locked in the back of their closet. She wasn't waiting for something bad to happen. But she had learned, through years of disappointment, that even love needs a paper trail. And in a world where women like her often walked away with nothing but broken hearts and bad credit, she'd made a vow to herself. If life ever handed them something big, she wouldn't let it take everything from her again. It happened on a Wednesday. A regular, forgettable kind of day, the kind that came and went without ceremony. The kind of day where you kept your head down and hoped nothing else broke, spilled, or snapped. Ava Carter had been working a double shift at the hospital. Her back ached from lifting patients, and her hands were raw from scrubbing. She hadn't eaten a real meal since sunrise, and all she wanted was to get home, shower, and collapse into bed. But when she walked into the apartment that night, something was different. The lights were on, music was playing, and there was Marcus, her husband, standing in the middle of their small living room, waving something in the air with a grin so wide it looked unhinged. "Ava!" he shouted, voice cracking. "Baby, we made it!" He shoved a crumpled piece of paper into her hand. It was a lottery ticket. At first she blinked, confused, too exhausted to understand what she was holding. "Check the numbers," Marcus said, his hands trembling. "Check them, right now." Ava squinted. "Then read them aloud, slowly, one by one." Every single number matched. Every single one. She looked up at Marcus. He wasn't joking. He wasn't playing. He had won. They had won. $8 million. $8 million. Ava's knees nearly gave out. She laughed, then cried, then laughed again. She clutched Marcus like he might vanish, like the floor might open up beneath them and take it all back. For the first time in years, she let herself imagine a life without exhaustion, without scarcity, without fear. That night, they didn't sleep. They sat on the floor, arms around each other, whispering dreams into the dark like teenagers. A house, a reliable car, a break. For once, they wouldn't have to survive. They could live. The next morning, they drove to the state lottery office, hand in hand. They took the lump sum payout, just under $6 million after taxes. The woman behind the glass smiled and slid the check across the counter like it was nothing. But to Ava, it felt like the universe was finally paying her back, with interest. In the days that followed, Ava allowed herself to dream. She browsed real estate listings for houses with porches and quiet backyards. She looked at nursing school programs, something she'd shelved for years. She even opened a tab full of dresses ones she'd never afforded before. just to imagine. Marcus, too, was buzzing. He talked about paying off debts, buying a car for his son, taking his mother on a cruise. He mentioned Hawaii more than once. Ava listened, smiled, laughed along. They both deserved this. They had crawled through the mud together. Now they were finally standing in the sun. But it didn't take long for the sun to start burning. Marcus's phone started blowing up within days. People Ava had never heard of, cousins, old classmates, childhood friends, calling, texting, showing up unannounced. Then came the women. Messages from strangers claiming to know Marcus. Photos, vague suggestions. You remember me? We should catch up. Been thinking about you. Ava brushed it off at first. Money attracted noise. It was natural. But then Marcus started answering. He started dressing differently, flashy shoes, designer labels. He began disappearing for hours at a time, saying he was handling things. He took her to a fancy restaurant one night, but spent most of the evening on his phone. When Ava asked about setting money aside for savings or retirement, Marcus laughed it off. Let me enjoy this, baby, he said. We deserve it. He bought a luxury car, quit his job, booked weekend trips with friends. And Ava had once dreamed of quiet mornings, of time to breathe, found herself watching from the sidelines as the man she had built a life with began to slip away. He was changing, fast. She tried to talk to him, remind him of the plan, the house, school, the dreams they'd whispered on the floor that night. But Marcus only grew more distant. He said she was trying to control him. He said she was acting like she didn't trust him. One night they had a fight, a real one. Not raised voices, but deep words, sharp, cold, final. That night, he didn't come home. Ava sat by the window until dawn, the silence louder than any storm. The next morning, the first headline hit her like a punch. A tagged photo online. Marcus. A nightclub. A woman, not Ava. Someone taller, lighter-skinned, wearing heels that screamed money. Ava said nothing. She went to work, came home, and told herself it was a phase. But deep down, she knew. The money hadn't changed everything. It had revealed what was already there. And now, the woman who had once worked 3 jobs to keep Marcus afloat, who had sold her father's land and taken on his debts, was standing in the shadow of a man who no longer remembered what it had cost her to love him. If Ava Carter had imagined that the money would make Marcus Whitmore softer, more grounded, more grateful, she had been wrong. Something in him shifted the moment that lottery check cleared. At first, it was subtle. He started sleeping in later, buying brand-name clothes Ava had only seen on TV. He traded in their old second-hand Honda for a gleaming black luxury car that barely fit in their apartment's parking spot. He grinned like a boy who'd gotten away with something, revving the engine at red lights just to hear it purr. Ava didn't complain. Not yet. She told herself he was just celebrating, letting off steam after years of pressure. After all, hadn't they both earned this? But then the celebrating didn't stop. Marcus stopped going to work. He called it a waste of time now, like the job that once saved them from eviction was suddenly beneath him. He started partying, really partying. Late nights, new business friends, trips to Miami, bottle service, selfies with strangers. And Ava? She was still waking up at 6 a.m., paying bills, organizing paperwork, and quietly setting money aside just in case. When she tried to talk to Marcus gently, cautiously about budgeting, he waved her off. We've been poor our whole damn lives, Ava, he said. Let me breathe. But we could lose it if we're not careful, she told him. You know that. He rolled his eyes. Ain't nothing to lose. It's ours. But it didn't feel like theirs anymore. It felt like his. One night, Marcus came home reeking of cigar smoke and expensive cologne. Ava had stayed up, waiting, worried sick after he didn't answer her calls. When he finally stumbled in around 3 a.m., she tried again, tried to remind him who they were, what they'd built. "I'm not your project," he snapped, slamming the refrigerator door shut. "I'm not some charity case you get to micromanage." Ava's heart cracked, but she didn't cry. She just nodded, quietly. That's when she began to notice things missing. Little things. At first, his wedding ring, always off. His texts, always vague. His eyes, always somewhere else. Then came the parties. At first, they were casual, just a few friends at the apartment. Then came the women. Loud music. Laughter. Ava didn't recognize. Strangers in her kitchen, pouring liquor over marble countertops she hadn't even wanted. Marcus called it networking, but Ava called it what it was, distance, and that distance kept growing. He stopped holding her hand in public, stopped asking about her day, stopped seeing her, and in his place was someone who looked like Marcus but wasn't. One afternoon, Ava came home early from a meeting with a financial advisor, one she had set up without telling Marcus. She was tired of waiting for him to care. She wanted to protect whatever they had left. But when she opened the door, she saw the unmistakable silhouette of a woman slipping out of their bedroom, laughing. The woman was tall, light-skinned, wearing a designer dress and heels that clicked across the floor like a metronome counting down the end of something sacred. Ava froze. Marcus didn't even look surprised. "You don't belong here right now," he said, voice flat. Ava's hands trembled. "This is my home." Marcus gave a small, bitter laugh. "Not anymore." And that was the end of the conversation. He didn't apologize, didn't explain. That night, Ava found her clothes stuffed into trash bags and set on the porch. The locks were changed the next morning. She stood outside in the rain, soaked to the bone, staring at the apartment they had once shared. The apartment she had cleaned, maintained, paid bills for when he was out of work. The apartment where she had imagined they would grow old. He had erased her like she was a stain on his new lifestyle. Ava called his mother, Sharon Whitmore, hoping for some kind of support, a voice of reason. "She's pretty," Sharon said simply, then paused. "Let the man be happy." It felt like betrayal, stacked on betrayal. Even friends who once called her sister stopped answering the phone. Her world collapsed quietly, like a house with rotten beams. There was no screaming, no lawsuits, no front-page drama, just silence. And the kind of heartbreak that didn't bleed, it ached. Ava Carter didn't remember what she was wearing the day her life was reduced to trash bags on a porch. Maybe it was the blue scrubs she always wore when helping out at the clinic. Or maybe it was one of the old t-shirts Marcus used to say he loved her in, but it didn't matter, because whatever it was, it became the last thing she wore as a wife. The rain had come suddenly that evening, a soft, steady drizzle that soaked everything in its path. Ava stepped off the bus with groceries in hand, just a few essentials, eggs, milk, the brand of coffee Marcus used to like before he switched to imported espresso. She approached the apartment and paused. Something felt off. Her key didn't turn. She tried again. Nothing. She leaned back, confused, and then she saw it 2 trash bags, overstuffed and slouched on the front step like discarded thoughts. Her name, in black marker, written on a yellow sticky note taped to one of them. Her heart dropped into her stomach. She knocked. No answer. Knocked again. Harder. Laughter spilled from inside light, carefree, cruel. Then the door opened. Marcus stood there. Behind him, a woman Ava had never seen before lounged on their couch, sipping from a wine glass. She was wearing Ava's robe. Ava blinked. Her voice barely rose above the rain. "Marcus, what is this?" Marcus didn't flinch. "You don't live here anymore," he said flatly. "We're done. Papers are coming." He didn't look her in the eye. Didn't soften.
The door began to close. No. No, wait. Ava stepped forward, her words catching in her throat. Can we just talk, please?
Don't do this, not like this. But he had already turned away. The woman on the couch laughed. Then the door clicked shut. Ava stood on the porch for a long time, rain soaking through her clothes, her hands clutching the bag handles so tightly the plastic began to rip. She hoped, prayed, begged silently that the door would open again, that Marcus would come to his senses, that this was some kind of mistake. But the door stayed closed. The laughter inside continued, and she realized she was locked out not just of the apartment, but of everything they had built. She dragged the bags to the curb and sat beside them. An hour passed, then another. No one came. No one cared. It wasn't until a neighbor walked by and offered her a towel that she realized how numb she'd become. The woman didn't ask questions, just handed her the towel, helped her stand, and offered a ride.
Ava shook her head. I'm okay, she whispered, but she wasn't.
She called her cousin in Birmingham, choked out the words between tears, slept on the floor that night, curled beneath a donated quilt, surrounded by things she never thought she'd own again. Clothes packed by a man who once said he'd love her forever, thrown out like leftovers. The days that followed blurred together. Calls to Marcus went unanswered. Texts came back unread. Even his voicemail changed. No more shared message, no trace of Ava's voice. She tried reaching out to Sharon, his mother, the woman who had lived under her roof rent-free for almost a year, the woman Ava had driven to appointments and cooked for without complaint. Sharon's response was short. It's best to let him move on. Then she hung up. Ava cried in silence. Cried in the shower. Cried in the back room of a gas station where she'd picked up a part-time shift. Cried in church pews and public libraries. Anywhere the world might mistake her pain for prayer. She had no money for a lawyer, no heart left to fight. Even her brother Logan, as supportive as he was, didn't know how to reach her. You don't deserve this, he told her gently one night. But you've still got fight in you, Ava. I know you do. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe she was more than what Marcus had turned her into footnote in his story of wealth and reinvention. But it was hard. Hard to believe in yourself when the person you loved most had discarded you like a receipt. One day, while digging through a box of old papers in her cousin's garage, Ava found it. A manila envelope, water-stained but intact. Inside, a piece of lined notebook paper, folded neatly. 2 pages, signed, notarized. Her handwriting, Marcus's signature, her brother's block letters spelling out every line of the agreement. If Marcus ever came into money during their marriage and left her, every dollar would be hers. Ava stared at the paper, felt her breath catch. Not because it promised revenge, but because it promised that someone once had taken her seriously, had honored her sacrifice, had sworn that if he ever became the man he dreamed of being, he wouldn't forget the woman who helped him get there. And now that promise was the only thing she had left. Ava Carter sat on the edge of her cousin's twin-sized guest bed, the kind that squeaked every time you breathed too deeply. Around her were boxes full of what was left of her old life. Some clothes, a framed photo of her and Logan from childhood, a broken phone charger, and a shoebox labeled "important stuff" that now seemed almost laughable. She had been living like this for weeks. Floating, drifting between cities, crashing on couches, picking up whatever shifts she could manage, cleaning offices, ringing up gas station customers, folding laundry at a laundromat where the machines always ran too hot. She didn't talk much. Didn't cry anymore either. She just existed. Until Logan called one night. His voice came through the line like a lifeline, steady, grounded, filled with the kind of love that doesn't need to shout to be heard. Didn't y'all sign something back then? He asked gently. Ava blinked, confused. What?
That prenup, he said. The one we wrote up, remember? The paper I notarized? You still got that? She had forgotten. Not because it didn't matter, but because when you've been kicked hard enough, you stop believing anything you held on to could still save you. But Logan's words stirred something. That night, she stayed up tearing through boxes with hands that shook half from exhaustion, half from a tiny sliver of hope. And then she found it. A manila envelope. Water-stained on one corner. Inside, 2 pieces of paper, folded neatly, still smelling faintly of the drawer they'd been stored in all those years. The prenup, written in Logan's blocky handwriting on ruled paper. Simple, clear. Signed by Marcus Whitmore and Ava Carter. Stamped by the same corner store notary they used to buy bus passes and scratch-offs from. The language wasn't fancy. No legalese. No loopholes. Just a promise. If Marcus Whitmore were to come into significant financial gain through lottery, inheritance, or otherwise during the course of his legal marriage to Ava Carter, and if the marriage were to end in divorce, the entirety of said gain would be transferred to Ava Carter. That was it. No tricks, no backup clauses. No expiration. Ava stared at it for a long time. She remembered the night they wrote it. Sitting on their old couch, knees touching, laughing between bites of takeout, Marcus had joked, "If I ever hit it big, it's because of you. You carried me. This is the least I can do." And she had believed him. Not because she needed the paper, but because back then Marcus still looked her in the eye when he made promises. Back then, they were still them. But now that promise was the only thing that hadn't abandoned her. Ava didn't want revenge. She didn't want headlines. She didn't even want the money, not really. She just wanted peace. And that paper? It might finally give her that. The next morning, she took it to a local attorney someone at the gas station had recommended. Mr. Whitaker. Older gentleman. Kind eyes. Wore a wedding ring that looked like it had been on his hand for 40 years. He sat quietly while she unfolded the document and laid it on his desk. He read every line slowly, then looked up at her. "This is enforceable," he said simply. Ava blinked. "Even though it's handwritten?" "It's signed," he said. "It's dated." "It's notarized, and it's very, very clear." Ava swallowed hard. "What would it take to fight this?" He shook his head. "Not much," he said. "You wouldn't be fighting. You'd be executing what's already yours." Ava felt her body go still. Mr. Whitaker leaned forward, his voice kind but firm. "He left you with nothing, Ms. Carter. But you left him with a signed promise. That's not revenge." "That's justice." She sat back in the chair, breath shallow. For the first time in weeks, she felt something shift. Not anger, not even satisfaction. Just the faintest whisper of relief. Of being seen, of being remembered. Marcus may have rewritten their story. But this one part, this one line, it still belonged to her. And she was ready to read it out loud. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and something sour, like rain-soaked carpet and stale coffee. Ava Carter sat on a bench near courtroom 3B, the prenup folded carefully in her lap. She'd read it at least a dozen times that morning, though every word was already etched into her memory. Across from her, Mr. Whitaker flipped through a slim folder of documents, calm as ever. He looked up at her with the kind of expression that didn't need words, only presence. "You ready?" he asked softly. Ava nodded, though her stomach twisted in knots. She didn't feel ready. She felt heavy. Not with fear, exactly, but with the weight of every year she'd spent keeping someone else's life together, while hers quietly unraveled. When Marcus Whitmore finally arrived, he looked nothing like the man she had once loved. His once tailored suit jacket now hung slightly loose. His watch was still expensive, but the swagger behind it had dulled. He walked into the courtroom with a new lawyer and a scowl,
like this whole ordeal was some minor inconvenience he couldn't wait to brush off. He didn't look at Ava, didn't say a word. Just sat down at the opposite table and slouched back in his chair, like a man who still thought the rules didn't apply to him. The judge, an older black woman with stern eyes and a no-nonsense tone, called the room to order. "This won't take long, Mr. Whitaker said quietly as he stood, and he was right, because the paper didn't lie. There it was, signed, dated, notarized, and crystal clear. A binding contract drawn up in good faith during a marriage where one person gave everything and asked only for protection in return. Marcus's attorney stammered through a few weak objections, claimed the agreement was informal, that circumstances had changed, that Marcus hadn't fully understood the implications at the time. But the judge wasn't moved. She picked up the document, read it once, then again, and then she looked at Marcus. "You were not coerced. You signed this freely," she said. "And now you want the court to pretend it didn't happen because you don't like the outcome?" Silence. The courtroom was still. Ava sat motionless, watching the man who had thrown her away stare at the floor like a schoolboy caught cheating on a test. The judge set the paper down. "This agreement is valid," she ruled, her voice sharp as glass, "and enforceable. All remaining lottery winnings are to be transferred to Ms. Ava Carter immediately." There was no applause, no gasp, just the sound of a gavel striking wood and a chapter closing without ceremony. Marcus didn't speak. He didn't fight. He just stood up and walked out as if he could outrun the shame clinging to his heels. Ava didn't watch him leave. She just stared at the document in her hand, now marked with a seal that made it final. Official. Real. It wasn't joy she felt, not even justice, just relief. A quiet, bone-deep exhale that came from a place far older than the marriage itself. When Mr. Whitaker handed her the check later that afternoon, she didn't cry. She didn't dance. She just said thank you and folded it into her bag like it was nothing more than a receipt from a life she had finally left behind. That evening, Ava sat alone at a bus stop, the same one where she had first met Marcus all those years ago. The same cracked pavement, the same rusted bench, the same humming streetlights. But she was different now, not because of the money, but because she had finally chosen herself. No one else had ever done that for her. She had done it. She didn't call Logan, didn't post anything, didn't even tell her cousin. She just sat there for a while, watching the cars go by, thinking about everything she had lost and what, in the quietest way, she had finally reclaimed. Her dignity, her voice, her name. Ava Carter didn't tell anyone where she was going. She packed light, just a suitcase, a notebook, and the same manila envelope that had once saved her from drowning. She drove east, past the crowded highways of Atlanta, past the exits she used to take home, past the apartment she could no longer bear to think about. She kept going until the air smelled sweeter, until the streets grew quieter, until she found a little town outside Savannah where no one knew her name and no one asked questions. That's where she bought the house. It wasn't much. A small white bungalow with creaky floors and a porch that leaned slightly to one side. The backyard was overgrown and the kitchen cabinets squeaked. But it had sunlight in the mornings and silence at night, and for Ava, that was worth more than marble countertops or walk-in closets. She paid in cash. No mortgage. No interest. No one to co-sign, just hers. Fully, completely, finally, hers. For the first few weeks, Ava barely unpacked. She slept on the floor with a pillow from the guest room, listening to crickets outside and the low hum of her own breath. She didn't decorate, didn't hang photos, didn't rush to fill the space. She let herself breathe. Slowly, gently. Then one morning she went outside and stood in the backyard. The grass was knee-high, tangled and stubborn.
The soil was dry and cracked in places. But beneath all that, Ava saw something most people might have missed. She saw possibility, so she rolled up her sleeves and started pulling weeds, not because she was trying to forget, but because she was finally making space to begin. Each morning, she tended to her little garden. Tomatoes, collard greens, bell peppers, things her mother used to grow when times were good. She didn't talk much, didn't socialize, but slowly the neighbors began to wave. One dropped off a bag of compost. Another brought by a pie with a sticky note that said, "Welcome home, wherever that is." Ava smiled and kept working. When the first tomato ripened, she held it in her hands like something sacred. Not because it was perfect, it wasn't. It was small, a little misshapen, but it was hers. She had grown it. With no one watching, no one judging, no one taking it from her. She started going to church again quietly, in the back row. The sermons were soft, the choir a little off-key, but the kindness was real. No one asked about her past. No one tried to save her. They just offered coffee and smiles and an occasional, "Glad to see you again." It was more than enough. Ava never flaunted the money. She still shopped at the same grocery stores, drove a modest car, wore the same clothes she'd owned for years. She donated quietly to the hospital where she once worked, to the college fund at her old church, to a local shelter in her mother's name. And when she paid off the debts of friends and family who had helped her during the worst months, she did it anonymously. No one knew. That was how she wanted it, because peace, Ava had learned, didn't need applause, it just needed room to grow. Sometimes, late at night, she would sit by the window with a cup of tea and stare out at her garden, watching the moonlight fall across the leaves. And she would think about everything she had lost, her home, her marriage, the family she thought she'd built, and still she didn't regret it. Because through all the hurt, all the betrayal, she had never lost herself. Not fully, not forever. And now, in this quiet little town, with dirt beneath her nails and no one to answer to, Ava Carter had finally found something she'd never known she needed: solitude without loneliness, stillness without fear, freedom without compromise. She didn't chase love, didn't seek revenge, she simply lived. And that, more than any check or courtroom victory, was her greatest triumph. Marcus Whitmore had once believed the money would last forever, that it would shield him from consequences, that it would fill every hole life had carved into him, that it would prove finally that he was somebody. But the money moved fast. Faster than he expected. The parties got bigger, the circles wider, the hotel stays longer. At first, people were eager to be around him. They smiled easily, poured his drinks, took selfies with him like he was famous. They whispered his name like it meant something. But when the money ran low and then out, those same people disappeared like mist in the sun. The new girlfriend, Vanessa, left the day after his bank card declined at brunch. She didn't even say goodbye, just packed her designer purse and walked out of the penthouse he was already 3 months behind on. The car was repossessed a week later. The condo locked him out before he could pack his things. He tried calling people, old friends, cousins, even co-workers he used to laugh with, but no one answered. No one wanted to be near him when the music stopped. He moved back in with his mother, Sharon, who gave him the spare bedroom and nothing else. No sympathy. No softness, just rules. Rent due on the 1st. Wash your own dishes, don't leave the lights on. He didn't argue. What was there to say? He spent most of his days on the couch, staring at a muted television, replaying everything in his mind: the rise, the fall, the courtroom. Ava. Ava. He hadn't said her name out loud in months, not since the judge awarded her everything. At first, he was angry. Furious. He told anyone who would listen that she set him up, that she tricked him, that it wasn't fair. But deep down, He knew. She had warned him, she had loved him, and he had thrown it all away. What stung most wasn't the money. It was the memory of a woman who had given him every piece of herself when she had nothing to spare. A woman who cooked for his mother, cared for his child, covered his debts, and never once asked for credit. And when it was his turn to give back, he had turned his back. Marcus didn't know where she was now, didn't know if she was happy or if she thought of him at all. Until one afternoon, months later, when an old neighbor called to check in. "Just wanted you to know," the woman said, her voice low. "She's doing well. Bought a house out near Savannah. Got a little garden."
"Seems peaceful." Marcus didn't reply. He sat in silence long after the call ended. Outside, the wind rustled through a broken screen door. Inside, the television droned on with a rerun no one was watching. He wondered if Ava ever thought about him. He wondered if she hated him. But Ava didn't think about Marcus often, not anymore. Her days were too full for that. She had tomatoes to prune, bills to pay, a window to sit by each morning as the sun broke over the trees. Sometimes, a neighbor would ask if she was married. She'd smile softly and say, "Not anymore." But she never spoke ill of Marcus. She didn't need to. Life had already spoken on her behalf. And when people tried to praise her, say how strong she was, how lucky, she would just nod politely and change the subject. Because Ava knew the truth. She hadn't been lucky. She had been honest. She had been patient. She had been kind, even when no one was kind to her. And most of all, she had been tired, so tired of giving everything and getting nothing in return. So when the moment came to reclaim her worth, she did it not out of spite, but out of necessity. Not to hurt him, but to finally heal herself. Sometimes, late at night, Ava would sit by the window and think about all the versions of herself she had survived. The girl who bent over hospital beds, the woman who cooked for people who didn't say thank you, the wife who once believed love was the same as loyalty. She missed some of them. But she didn't long to go back. Because now, alone but never lonely, Ava Carter was exactly who she had fought so hard to become. A woman with peace, a woman with dignity, a woman who didn't need the world to know her story because she knew it herself, and that was enough. Life doesn't always reward you when you expect it, but it never forgets who you are. Ava Carter gave years of her life to a man who forgot her the moment he found comfort. She cooked, cleaned, supported, sacrificed until she was cast aside like she had never mattered. But in the silence of heartbreak, she discovered something most people overlook. Dignity is louder than revenge, and peace is more powerful than payback. This story reminds us that integrity isn't about being perfect, it's about staying true to yourself when no one's watching. It's about choosing kindness even when others choose selfishness. Ava didn't win because she fought dirty. She won because she never let go of who she was. For older audiences who've lived through loss, betrayal, or disappointment, this lesson lands deep. You don't need the world to clap for your strength. Sometimes the quietest victory is simply walking away with your self-worth intact. And if life ever gives you a second chance, plant peace where pain once lived and let no one take that garden from you again.